When I was starting out as a technician, I had to use the tools and the equipment that were in front of me and the processes that those around me were willing to share with me to get started. There was no money for tools, nor did I know what other processes existed. Hi, how you doing? I'm Holden Schamberger with Chiller Academy and HVAC Time. Today I'm going to be discussing the process of developing yourself as a technician or as a chiller mechanic and what I had to go through and just the process I put in place for myself that helped me grow and make advancements in my career. And if you'd like to really get to where you want to be and become the chiller mechanic that you look up to, I'd highly suggest you check out Chiller Academy if you're interested in that kind of thing. Online, self paced course, either way, that's not the point of today. The first thing I would really push is you need to have a strong understanding of principles. And when I talk about developing your process, I'm really honing in on how you go about your procedures. And your tools influence that as well as your actual education and your understanding. So having a clear concept of the principles of whatever it is we're doing, whether that's actually just recovery or evacuation, whether that's electrical principles for troubleshooting, we go in a lot of different directions, even from a mechanical perspective. And we need to have some concept of the principles themselves that will really help us work through what we need to understand for our own processes and how we can think through improving them. And if you really want to become a excellent technician or an excellent mechanic and you want to excel in this industry, you're really going to have to put time into thinking about how you do things, why you do things, and what are some ways that you can customize what you've learned for your way. Everybody, including myself, like we've all got our own ways of doing things. We've all got our suggestions, recommendations, stuff that we've sorted out for ourselves, but that doesn't mean that the way we think of it is best for everybody else, including yourself. You have to really consider what it is you want and how your mind thinks of it, how you compare it to other stuff, and what your life experience tells you works best or doesn't. And here's the thing, this is going to require you to actually take time to think through each process and just each thing. Two areas that I started with this is TXVs and my recovery process. So with TXVs, they're such a pain, one, troubleshoot, and then two, to replace. There's a lot of situations where it's miserable to deal with. And I got tired of it being so hard every time I needed to do it. And you're always, a lot of times you're in a very tight space, especially on smaller equipment, or even scaling up into larger chillers and industrial systems. You've got these massive pieces of pipe, and it's not easy brazing this stuff apart. Even if you have the room to cut and put couplings in, it's not always that simple. And it requires a lot of time and resources and an additional manpower to help hold everything, line it up. It's a lot. So I really just put a lot of time and energy into how could this be easier? Why is this just not jiving for me? And in that process, I thought through it far enough to realize rarely is the body ever the problem. And eventually I began to do experiments on sites, and I took a couple of, say, low risk repairs, and I just tried it. Even though all of the training I had up to that point said, hey, you just replace the whole thing, right? So the whole valve body, you just change the whole friggin' thing out, okay? Just something in me said, surely there's other ways, but I couldn't find them. So in my time just spent thinking through it and trying to make a decision on my own of, do I actually agree with that practice, or am I just following what everybody else has said without actually believing in it? I eventually did come to the conclusion of trying to do rebuilds. And I did one and it went great. No issues. You got to make sure everything's correct. Your valve body is the same. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, and I knew I was taking a risk by doing it. I'm not suggesting you should play around with things. I had a high risk of getting in trouble me trying this. And so like these are the kind of things, if you're not careful, I mean they get you fired, okay? So just keep that in mind. But I believed I'd put enough thought into it that it was worth the attempt. And it worked out great. And I tried another one and it worked out great. And from that point forward, I just slowly began to improve that even further. And it made a huge impact on how quickly I can turn around a service and repair. And I did something similar on recoveries. So, doing a recovery on a system and doing just a direct recovery, and this is fairly early on in my career, trying to do 410A, especially in the summertime, it was crazy. And then trying to haul buckets of ice and keep the tank cool, like, we had so much trouble, especially on 10, 20, 30, 40 plus pounds of refrigerant. It takes a lot to recover that, and it's not that just quick and easy. And so, yeah, it just got me thinking, just trying to deal with this hot tank just seems a bit ridiculous. Like, what other ways is there? Well, what if I could pre-cool the refrigerant and I could take the heat, because I understood the theory enough to realize that, okay, so the tank gets hot because of heat of compression. So there's the theory, heat of compression, because my recovery machine is compressing the refrigerant down, is creating the heat, which then stacks in my recovery cylinder, makes it hot. So if I can remove that heat created, then I don't have to deal with the hot tank, and I don't have to deal with all the ice and the water and just all the other BS that was involved. So I came up with a concept for a subcooler. Little did I know, I wasn't the one that invented the idea. Other people also had it. I came up with it. I created a prototype, and I made my first subcooler, thinking at the time I had invented something new. I was corrected of that later. Either way, it worked. It worked great, and it was the first stepping stone. And I later came up with other additions to that, or revisions that scaled to larger systems, because my first version only worked really well on smaller scale, and I needed something that could work on a larger scale, and I did come up with that. But it's thinking through that. It's taking those theories, understanding what is happening where and why, and applying a faster process. This also could be applied to how I charge refrigerant, like doing a direct charge, just pumping it straight in with a recovery machine instead of trying to pull it all in via suction gas. There's some of these things that, some of you may understand this stuff and you were taught these things, but there's a lot of us that wasn't. And there's a lot of us who didn't have somebody that could guide us through that process, and we had to just kind of figure it out on our own. It was our own just thinking through and actually applying time to consider what we were doing, how we were doing it, to then come up with these better solutions. And I do really recommend to you that take the time to improve your process and focus on your process over your tools. Tools will help improve things, but the better you can get, the better processes you have, the faster and more accurate you are with your recovery and repair and troubleshooting, the more money will follow. It just will. Even if that requires you to change positions or companies or whatever, which is unfortunate, but it is a reality we deal with. So even if that is necessary, the greater you develop your skills, the more that the money will follow you and will catch up, which money also means that if you're smart and you're wise with how you use it, you can reinvest that into tools. I mean, me personally, I think I've got $30,000-$40,000 invested in tools that I've had to accumulate over a decade's worth of being in the industry. But I would consider that normal. Most of us who have taken this seriously have taken those steps and made those investments. If you haven't, so the tools aren't what makes it is not what makes you good. You have to have the skill to know how to use the tool properly, and you have to have thought through these things far enough on your own to know how to use the tool properly and to maximize its benefits. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of money spent for a marginal improvement. If you don't actually know yourself and you haven't practiced and understood how to maximize that tool. So the important thing here is focusing on improving your process skills and the way you think of it, and tools are secondary to that to help you achieve better results. And then as I've made those connections and made improvements, start kind of just gamifying it. And I think I don't want to use the term gamifying in a cliche way because right now it is kind of a buzz term, I guess. But I don't mean it that way. What I mean is, what I did is I would track, and I would actually, for fun, I did this for fun. I would log how long it took me to do different things, especially if I knew I wanted to experiment with something. And I would keep a track of that, at least mentally. I may not necessarily write it down, but I would mentally just keep a track. Okay, this recovery, doing it this way, took X amount of time. And then the next time, I would try something a little different and modify my setup a little bit. And I found that doing it this way, my recovery took this much time. And that kind of became this game to me. And for me, it was fun to try to beat my previous record almost. And it's the way I began to kind of think about it. And so I was always tweaking, trying this, trying that, and just thinking through, okay, what could I improve here? That's how I figured out that Appion's, the G5 Twin, is a fantastic liquid pump, but you have to remove the depressors. And just thinking through flow rate and how that theory would work on that pump, I began to realize that those depressors they would create too much back pressure, which would deadhead the pump and cause it to shudder. By just going through the process and playing the game in my head, I removed removed the depressors. I'd already gotten to the point of pulling the cores out by this time. And all of a sudden, I could flow full liquid, and the pump would never shudder. And it was revolutionary to me. I didn't have somebody there to teach me those things and to show me that kind of stuff. I figured it out. And it's by doing exactly what I'm saying, just playing a game with myself of how can I get better this time? How do I make it slightly better? And time after time after time after time, we're talking hundreds of applications of each of these little processes. You can really begin to hone in your skill and start operating at a much higher level, and I would say much faster if you really enjoy the process. With that, if you'd like to be a part of the chiller community or just get some really excellent high-end chiller education that is at your pace, you can take it in the field with you. We've got a chiller community where you can come in and have discussions or get troubleshooting support, whatever it is you need. Get the senior people in your life to help give you guidance that you don't otherwise have. That is what is built into Chiller Academy. We're there to help you and support you. I personally lead all the lessons and teach everything. So if you'd like to be a part of that, go check it out, chilleracademy.com. I'd highly recommend the Introduction to Chillers course. Even if you have some experience and you think you have a good handle on things, I would challenge you to go read through the curriculum and see how many things that you couldn't explain to somebody else if you had to. You might actually be more in there than you realize. With that, MTT, make the time for your family, for your spouse, for your kids. I'll see you around.